Hi, welcome. We're now being recorded, and you know where we are because we've been chatting in our chat room. We're here waiting to hear this amazing presentation by Susanne Garfield Jones. And we started this with to kind of take a break from COVID and see folks and delight in art. And so we're very grateful for Susanne that she is spending her time and her talent, quite frankly, with us. So.
Oh, thanks, Claudia. So, perfect. Okay, let me.
Let me. Just wanted to pull up that first slide.
Okay.
So the topic of this evening's art soiree is gratitude and giving thanks, and it seemed like a perfect topic for November. And what a better way than to experience gratitude through nature. Henry David Thoreau said, "My profession is to always find God in nature." Well, since it's dark outside right now and we can't do a nature walk, we thought we'd do the next best thing, which is to view nature through art. There's a saying that goes, "The mind takes the shape from whatever it rests upon." So for tonight, let's rest our mind on these beautiful paintings. And our nature guide tonight is Susanne Garfield. You all know that Susanne, and you know that she's a docent at the Crocker Art Gallery and Museum. I want to share that last month's art and meditation meetup went so well that the Crocker was so impressed that they asked her to teach a class on how to create a virtual art tour. Well, that was Suzanne's first one. So to me, this sums up who Susanne is. Whatever she does, she puts her heart into it. She puts her time and her talent and her research intellect into it, and she does it so very well. So thank you, Susanne, for sharing your time and your talent with us tonight as we journey through California with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia, for that lovely introduction. And as you've said that, nature opens our hearts and makes us realize that we are part of nature. We're not separate. And when we see ourselves in nature, it also connects us to each other, because it's very clear that everything is connected in one. And I actually think that nature is one of the most glorious and consistent sources of generosity and gratefulness in our life. Nature always gives back. When we experience the majesty of nature, any nature, we can feel immediately in touch with the mystery of our own majesty and our own smallness. I think Claudia even mentioned that last night when she was walking. She said how small she felt with the vast sky. But feeling small and vast in the natural world can lead us swiftly to a sense of the sacred. And we're going to look at California's nature, and it's like no other. Its majesties of oceans and mountains, rivers, farmlands, endless valleys, and redwood forests provides us with an abundant way to be grateful. So, as Claudia mentioned tonight, I invite you to journey with me, and later in a meditation with Claudia, the wonder of California's nature and abundance, and opening our hearts to gratitude and thankfulness and to peace. So first, let me set the stage here and give you a bit of background on the emergence of the American style that's called the Hudson River School. And its French cousin, as many of you heard, is the Barbizon School. Artists of this style rendered the awe and grandeur of nature in painstakingly active but very tight brushstrokes with a dramatic sense of light. And these styles drew from the romanticism of the 18th century, but it elevated landscape painting from a mere background of mythological or classical scenes to a subject in its own right. These artists had a desire to portray not just the realism of nature, not just its sheer beauty, awe, or even the terror that man might experience when contemplating the wonders of the natural world, but the presence of the divine in it, a sense of spirituality. That was their real need. And remember, this was a time of Thoreau and Emerson and Walt Whitman and Longfellow. But the Hudson River School could not have existed without the American landscape. It was unsullied, it was sublime, and the artist wanted to capture it in a grand, sweeping style. So let's start off with first one, which is The Grand Canyon of the Sierra by Thomas Hill. And I'd like to pick up California's art story, kind of in the middle of the Hudson River School style. This is one of the jewels of the Crocker collection. It's the depiction of, we all probably recognize, Yosemite Valley. It's brilliantly rendered on a huge canvas. This is a huge piece. It's 6 feet tall by 10 feet long. And it must be large to capture this sense of magnificent, powerful landscape. Now, Thomas Hill was born in England, but he emigrated at 15 to the United States. He studied art in Pennsylvania. And this is important because then he traveled to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And it's in a region that's associated with the painters of the Hudson River School. He left for California in 1861. And remember, at that point, the Transcontinental Railroad hadn't started. So he probably went by ship around to San Francisco. He made his first sketching trip to the Sierra in 1865. And the Crockers then purchased his first work, which was not this, it was one called Sugarloaf Peak, as their first work by a contemporary artist of that day. So we know that the Yosemite has held a very powerful attraction for artists. They've inspiring generations of them. And the Crockers would purportedly commit to purchasing this particular piece for $10,000 even before it was completed. And Yosemite became Hill's signature subject. And this one was actually done, he had traveled to France. And this one captures a little bit of the Barbizon style, which has a little bit more intimacy. So you can see in the front a little bit, there's some people, and there looks like a little tent of some side, or a dwelling onto the right-hand side. So it's a little bit more intimate. And this painting also toured on the East Coast, had its own show, and it was used as a travel poster to draw visitors by railroad to the West. So by the 1880s, this Hudson River style was becoming out of fashion in the East United States, and many felt it was just overly grandiose, heroic, and contrived art. Though these kind of paintings were still appreciated in California, what was beginning to emerge were the Luminist and the Impressionist. So we can go to and if anybody has any questions, just jump right in. So Claudia, we can go to the next one. Okay. The Luminist is an American style of painting, and they're considered
I had a question, Suzanne.
Sure, Rochelle.
Hey, so do you know where that would be in Yosemite Valley? I saw a half dome on that last one on the right. Is that like on the road you would drive in?
Is that South Road as you come in?
Past Half Dome.
Sorry.
And out.
It's that South Road where you come in through the tunnel and you see Yosemite Valley framed. Now remember, these artists also took some what do they call it? They took liberties. Thank you. They took liberties. They would move things. They would put them closer together, put them far apart. But this is a pretty good rendering of the Yosemite Valley. So it's probably in that area, but there were no roads, so he probably came in by horseback or mule. So that view might be a little distorted than what we would normally see as we come around and come in through that tunnel.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Travel.
Yeah, a long time to travel.
No, make sure we
and
go there as soon as COVID's are over, you know.
and what was I going to tell you? I'm glad it's about this is that they sketched a lot outdoors, but they did not paint outdoors. So he brought all his sketches back to his studio in Boston and painted there. So that the opening, the starting of the plein air or the open air painting didn't start until a little later, and that's what we're going to be getting into with these Luminists and then the early Impressionists. So we'll go to the next one, and these are kind of considered, this Luminist is kind of a offshoot of the Hudson River School, but more so it's kind of the American counterpart to the early Impressionists, and their goal, of course, like the Hudson River and Barbizon, was to illustrate nature's radiance and interpret the landscape with a spiritual meaning. But their work was quieter, many times focused on water, and very dreamy. They wanted not only to paint the natural landscape, but a sense of feeling that the landscape produces. You'll notice this one that focuses on the intensity of light around them, not necessarily the object. They isolated the most intense light and then they dulled all other light. So you'll see how the light plays on the water. And the artist then used the two trees as a frame for the mountains of the Sierra. This is Lake Tahoe. And Claudia, if you want to go to the next one.
Who's the artist?
Beg your pardon?
Who's the artist?
I'm blanking. Thanks, I didn't put this one down. I'm blanking
Oh,
on it.
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry. I'm sorry. I should know this one.
Okay.
Oh, Suzanne, before you go on, Suzanne,
Yeah, Helen.
are those clouds at the top supposed to represent something? They look like monsters coming toward us.
Well, you know, Helen, I think your interpretation can be as good as anything else. I think this was the artist's rendering of clouds, and the clouds always play an important part in a landscape sky, is because they reflect the light. So they also become an object of their own. So it could be however you choose to interpret it. The next piece. Also, as you can see, this one is by Raymond Dab Yellen, also a California artist. This is the Golden Gate, sunset at the Golden Gate. And you can see that the intensity of the light is in the western sky as the sun is setting, but then the luminosity of how it reflects off the rocks and the water is just mesmerizing. And it's calming, it's peaceful. I mean, you can stand on the shore right there. You can be right there. Okay, so the Luminists can also, you know, they painted with clear colors. They detailed objects with very precise brush strokes. So they still had that same very tight brush stroke, which was a little different than what Impressionism was going. So let's talk a little about that revolution in painting. That was the Impressionists. And so around 1860s, there was a rise of interest in the scientific study of light and color. And there was a shift in the concept of painting. And a small group of artists, they were considered radicals at their time. They preferred the on-site and plein air, which is in the open air. And this is where that painting outside started. They started with a more open and loose style, and they rejected this type of realism that we saw in the Thomas Hill. They made an effort, these Impressionists made an effort to capture or duplicate the true momentary and transient effects of light in all its changing qualities. So they wanted to capture a moment. They did not blend or shade their colors as was customary in paintings like this. And they began to look for ways to make the light and color appear more brilliant by applying separate and actually often thick brush strokes of pure color to a canvas. And it allows the viewer's eyes to combine them optically. So Claudia, if you want to drop to the next one, go to the next one, please. So as you can see, very different in this particular piece. This was, we moved into California Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. So again, it was kind of a parallel course, the late 1880s through the 1920s, which lasted a little longer than the European Impressionist time. California artists painted in this style that exalted the amazing landscape and California's unique light. Again, this was called California Impressionist or the California Plein Air. They combined very, the distinctive aspects of the fresh Impressionism and Post-Impressionism influence, but they added their own looseness. The brush strokes, as you can see, become looser, colors more vibrant, and then the subjects were less grandiose. But they still captured this sense of the divine, of spiritual closeness with nature. And this particular piece, you can see that the clouds, Lillian, you had mentioned, Helen, you had mentioned clouds before. These actually play a good deal of the canvas. They're half of the painting. These lovely, puffy clouds, but done with very active, loose brushstrokes. And when you get to see these up close, you can see that the paint is layered thick and that the colors are not blended. They're just put together and your eye actually begins to blend those colors. So the Northern California Impressionists kind of, they congregated in the Carmel, Monterey colonies, and the Southern California Impressionists were in the Laguna Beach area. That didn't necessarily say they only painted there, but that seemed to be where they congregated. And scientifically, there is something a little different about California's crystalline air, especially on the coast. It's supposedly had these molecules, which makes everything more intense and brighter. So let's go to the next one. Poppies. So as you feast on these fields of poppies, I'd like to share a little bit about the artist who did both of these. His name was Granville Redmond. And he was an amazing, amazing person. He contracted scarlet fever as a 2-year-old, and that left him permanently deaf. So he was born on the East Coast, but his family moved to San Jose when he was 8, and he was enrolled in a boarding student in the respected California Institute for the Deaf and the Dumb and the Blind. And this is what it was called in Berkeley at the time. Today it's called the California School for the Deaf, and it's in Fremont. But the original building was up in the Berkeley Hills. So he began, by 18, he began attending classes at the California School of Design in San Francisco. So he'd take the ferry from Berkeley over to San Francisco. And he was soon enrolled in studying under Raymond Dab Yellen, who did the Golden Gate Sunset that we saw previously. And he was very much influenced by Dab, and Dab's taught him how to paint landscapes and evoked in him a lifelong sense of spiritual relevance for nature. And then some of his other instructors also left their mark on painting what we call tonalism. We'll talk a little more about that. So what's the story with the poppies? I mean, they're glorious and gorgeous type things. And you can see kind of two different styles. One to the left is very much an impressionist, light, puffy colors, and the one more to the right is more saturated, deep colors. But what is the story with the poppies? Around 1906, the California legislature named the poppy as the state flower. So Redmond made a very significant decision in his artistic life. He decided to specialize in fields of lupin dotted with these orange flowers. He painted so many poppy pictures that he complained he could not devote himself to the works he wanted to paint. And he loved nocturnes or night scenes, and he was skillful at them. They are absolutely gorgeous. But he wound up painting these, and he said that people would not buy his nocturnes because they all wanted poppies. And the reason they wanted poppies was because that's what sold, because the tourists wanted to bring them home from the Golden State as a souvenir. And being able to do this allowed him some financial stability that did elude many of the artists during the Great Depression. And later in his life, he supplemented his earnings as an actor in silent films with Charlie Chaplin. So he was a tall man, he was a big man, he was, even though he didn't speak or hear, he was the life of the party. And many of his compatriot artists, friends, learned sign language so they could communicate with him. He was asked what was his greatest challenge, being deaf as an artist, and people would say, oh, maybe because you can't hear people, or you're alone a lot. And he said the greatest challenge was walking through the dry grass and not being able to hear the rattlesnakes. So he had a wonderful sense of humor. Moving on, let's move on to the next piece. Claudia, there we go. Laguna Trees by Guy Rose. Guy Rose, a true California native son. He was born in San Gabriel in the southern part of the state, and he's probably the state's most notable impressionist, post-impressionist. He studied in San Francisco at the School of Design, and then he went, as most of the artists did at the time, to Paris to further study at another of the art schools there. He moved to Giverny in 1890, and those of you who are familiar with Giverny, that's the home of Monet. And at that point, he had a lot of exposure to Monet's studio. And then after a year, he returned home, and then he moved back to Giverny and purchased a cottage and lived the next 13 years there. He painted with Monet as his mentor. So you can see in this glorious piece that the influence that Monet had on his painting application and approach to color and lightness. And Rose preferred his subject matter of Southern California. Most of them did incorporate a little bit of the French Impressionist style, but he also captured California's crystalline light and that airy sky, and using that pastel color palette and those, again, loose brush strokes. The clouds are just these puffy cotton balls, but you can feel the breeze coming, and you can feel like you could be standing there looking at these gorgeous eucalyptus trees. In this painting, Rose probably worked plein air. He probably set his easel up under the purple shadows of the tree that you see a little bit in the foreground. So he sat there and painted very quickly and captured this moment of light. Okay, let's go to the next one, please. Now, I want to talk a little about tonalists. Now, tonalists were also part of these impressionist style, but this painting, if you look at it, has a very different feel and look than we saw with April Skies, which was that first impressionist piece. What was happening were the Northern California impressionists were moving from these grand vistas to more intimate views. And they were less concerned about recording the details of specific location and more about capturing the color, atmosphere, and feelings that they experience. So these California tonalists, or like for a tone, a certain tone, began adapting a more limited palette. They provided these cool, quiet, misty, tranquil, moody paintings. And the tonalists prized mood over the topography, and they still wanted to have this conversation. They wanted to evoke this conversation with the divine. So when we look at this piece, your blood pressure probably dropped 10 points. It's just very, very calming and quiet. And the tonalists were mostly Northern California artists. They worked in these, they would pick a palette of grays and greens or blues and grays, and they would stay in that particular tone to evoke this very quiet, calming sense. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, totally different totally different than the tonalist. And what I love about Rick Schell's painting is that he has a conversation with the divine another way. He wasn't interested in the quiet nostalgia and that inward reflection favored by the tonalist. His work was active and changing and dynamic. He captures the raw power and the vitality of the Pacific against the area's rocky shores. It was said by an art critic that his work is a full crash of a Wagnerian orchestration. And when you look at this, you can see his symphony and you can almost hear the crescendo of the waves. He was determined to make the rocky cliffs of the Carmel Highlands, and that's where he lived. He moved there and lived his entire life there, reflect that age-old conflict of nature, and then where's man's place within it. And this is a very dramatic piece, also very impressionist, moving into the post-impressionist, but dramatic, very dramatic, and not peaceful at all. Okay, let's you know, we're moving into the modernist, the abstract era. So let's go to this next one. This done by Maynard Dixon. Many of you may know Maynard Dixon. He was he painted a lot of Western scenes and a lot of Sunset magazine covers. This is a really delightful, bold color, active brushstrokes, close-up subject, and was definitely a departure from one of the grandiose depictions of Yosemite Valley that the previous artist had portrayed. If we can look closely at this, I'm not sure how close, but you can see these very rough, active brushstrokes on them. There's nothing detailed and fine about the brushstrokes, but yet it all works together to create this amazing and glorious portrayal of Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite Valley, a whole different view of Yosemite. Now Dixon, as I said, he was a prolific painter. He did dozens of Sunset magazine covers, and he was also married to the great photographer Dorothea Lange. He was one of three wives. It was his second. And what she did with him was that her photographic style greatly influenced him, and it prompted him to produce paintings and works of art that were more stylized and more defined, like this little beauty. There's a tidbit of trivia that I found very interesting, in that Maynard Dixon was responsible for the Golden Gate Bridge, that is the color that is painted at the Golden Gate Bridge. And how that came about was Dixon was the brother-in-law to Charles Duncan, who was the public relations counsel to Joseph Strauss, who was the engineer for the Golden Gate project. And Dixon had a meeting in his San Francisco studio to discuss design elements with the architect and the engineer. And they were talking about what color the Golden Gate should be painted. And Dixon painted a wide rust color circle around the light bulb on the ceiling of his studio. And it's showing that the color brought warmth to the cold room and the San Francisco gray days. And so they all agreed that the bridge should become that rust orange color, and has stayed that to the day. So let's jump ahead 60 years.
Great story.
It's wonderful. I mean, I love these little tidbits, the backstory of some of these artists that you find. And the interesting thing is most of these artists knew each other. It was a small community. I mean, all the Impressionists who lived in the Carmel area knew each other. The Southern California artists, they spoke with one another, they influenced one another, they compared notes with one another, and they probably shared wives with one another. I don't know, some of them certainly did. So let's end our tour with two contemporary artists who, in my opinion, are California treasures, Gregory Kondos and Wayne Thiebaud. Both, as you'll see in these, drew a tad bit from the Hudson River styles of perspective, and from the colors of the light and bold strokes of the Impressionists, the abstract blocks of color from the modernist, and those intimate views of quietness of the tonalists. So let's take a look at Condos and Thibaut, and let's just soak in the mood and the colors and the feelings. And this first one we see up is Gregory Condos, and it is a thickly painted landscape. And when you see this in person, you can see these very thick strokes, buttery almost. They're bright, they're warm color. And when you look at this, even the cool tones in this painting are warm, they're heated. They evoke the sun warm, large expanses of the summer sky and water. This painting kind of borders on that tonalist style with an intensity of color and heat, and it kind of flattens the detail, but it's very tranquil. Not a lot of pieces to it, but it evokes exactly somewhere on the Sacramento River near the Delta. And it is a very calming, lovely piece.
Is it large?
Is it, I'm sorry, Lil, would you say?
Large?
It's about 4 feet by 5 feet, 4 feet high by 5 feet long.
Uh-huh.
So it's a good sized piece. Whoops. Okay. Oh. Uh-oh.
She's dancing.
Claudia, there we go. Okay, well,
Cut her off.
we're gonna take a fast walk through right here. Don't blink, you'll miss the impressionist. Oh, there they go.
Ready?
Okay, now we're gonna look at Wayne Thibault's Auburn Hills. Now, Wayne Thibault what he used here was pastels. And it's just a piece that's infused with color. And pastels are kind of, in a way, akin to charcoal in they're malleable. You can squish them and blend them together. And there's just this richness the way he approaches a textural work. I mean, when you can see this one, you can see how he moved the pastels around. He used them like oils, very much like his oil paintings. This piece has a intimacy, I think, and a warmth from our Impressionist friends. And of course, it has like a little lyrical twist because he has an illusion of a landscape, but then the perspective as always in all Thibaults, is a little different. You know, you're having some shadow face forward, you're having some from the top with the shadows falling downward, but you do get a sense of feeling and mood from this, and that's the whole point of this type of art from Thibault.
I'm so glad you picked this one, Susanne, because I think we're all somewhat familiar with Thibault's pastries and his structured pieces, but this one is so inviting and calming. You just want to step into it. And
that's a good observation, and you're absolutely right. You could be standing there and you feel like he's inviting the viewer, come down into the valley with me. Come on into this. It's a very intimate scene, even though it shows a broad expanse of landscape. Now, Thibault just turned 100. Yeah. The Crocker has a show of his. He is an amazing artist. He still works in a studio every day. He plays tennis every day, and he still drives. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and he's always working and learning, and a lot of, if you get the chance, with Crocker opens back up and you do get the chance to see his shows, or even if you look online at some of his paintings, you'll see the year that he did it, which could be 1998, 2000, 2003, 2005. And that's because he works on them all the time. He keeps learning. And Lillian probably knows that he was friends with Don Burrell, who was the art director of the Nut Tree and gave Thibault his own show at one time. And so they became very close friends. Don Burrell was also the Crocker, I believe, the art
Yeah.
director for several years in the 50s, early 50s. So as again, the local artists, they knew each other and they worked together and they admired each other's work. And I just so enjoyed Thibaut's work. Just as an aside, when I was going to UC Davis, I took an art class, which we, you know, in my major we were all required to, and Thibaut was teaching it, and I had no idea who he was. So like, oh, that was the guy. And even in the 70s, he was pretty well known, and I was kind of clueless at that point. So I hope you enjoyed this tour of how art can evoke a feeling of gratefulness. You know, art allows us to open up ourselves, to go inward, giving us a sense of creating calm or healing or wonder or connecting with the divine.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So,
Thank you, Susanne.
oh, my pleasure. And now I hope we're all ready to dive into Claudia's meditation.
Yes. Okay.
Well, my friends, I think we could take any one of these paintings and go into it deeper.
Absolutely.
And you did such a beautiful job, and I just am so grateful for your consciousness and the presence that you bring to this. So now I'd like you to just kind of relax. This is what we do. We just relax, and we're going to move into the breath to allow us to do some relaxation here. This works even if you wake up in the middle of the night. I'm going to share that with you. But if you take a deep breath to the count of 5, and then hold it and release it to the count of 8 or 10. And then with that next inhale, fill up your lungs and move the breath down your core, down to your navel, so that you feel a slight pressure on your spine as that breath is fully engaged. And then release. Now, as you release it to a count of 10. And once again, as you've emptied your lungs, you might feel a slight pressure on your spine. Try that again, please. Inhaling to a count of 5, filling up your lungs and your core. Holding, and then expelling that air to a count of 8 or 10. This technique is called vagal breathing. And it's designed to relax and de-stress your body along the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve runs from the base of your neck down to your tailbone, and it's a very important nerve because it feeds and stimulates all your organs inside. Some people use it to reset their body, to rebalance it. And if you find your mind wandering during this meditation, just bring yourself back to that breath. The painting that we're going to choose to meditate on is the Golden Gate Bridge one, the Golden Gate Sunset. I'd like you to imagine yourself sitting there, maybe in a bench, or on a rock, or in the sand. Imagine a beautiful, soft, light white just warming you, warming your face, maybe and enveloping you like a lovely hug. You're feeling so peaceful, so settled in, so appreciated, just as you are. I wonder, as you look at this painting, if you see God, maybe in the clouds, maybe in the ridges, maybe in the ocean. Maybe you see God in every little grain of sand, or maybe in the waves, or maybe you see God everywhere, in everything combined. I wonder if you feel the movement of the waves. Each wave is unique, and yet each wave is similar. As they originate out on the horizon, and then rhythmically, with a pattern, they move to shore. Some say we're like a wave in the ocean, each of us so uniquely different, and yet similar in our makeup. Some say the wave in the ocean could be a metaphor for our relationship with God. God is the ocean, and we as the wave, each of us showing up differently, uniquely, in an individualized aspect of God. We are not the whole of God any more than the wave is the vastness and the completeness of the ocean. However, God is the whole of us. So we might not be the whole of God, but God is the whole of us. God is the whole of you. God is the whole of me. We are and we have all the components of God. God wisdom, good judgment, God intelligence, and God love. Ah, yes, love. Often love is the most accessible of God's powers to experience. I invite you to envision someone you love, someone that you love so much that your heart might burst with the joy and the commitment of loving this person. Sometimes that's easiest to do with a little child or a big child. Or a spouse, or a beloved pet. Filling yourself up with that love and focusing on that love. You see, you are love, just as God is love. And God loves you so much because God cannot help himself from loving you. You are that wave expressing the ocean in your own unique and amazing way. So, my dear friends, as we bring this meditation to a close, in thinking about love, love manifests itself in us as gratitude, as thankfulness, graciousness, for this wonderful state, this amazing world that we live in, and for the people who agree to join this journey with each of us. It's a sacred journey. It's our soul's journey. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And my friends, take a deep breath in. Thank you for sharing this journey. Thank you, Susanne. This beautiful, beautiful trip around California with the artists, with the masters. We are blessed. Thank you, God.
Thanks. Thank you, Claudia. That was wonderful. It was a lovely way to end, especially looking at this gorgeous, gorgeous sunset.